So to get started, I want to take a minute to introduce what the project is and why it's important. So the mapping project is our attempt to archive the rich and historic development of house music in Chicago. So we have been holding events like these. This is our third or fourth event. We've been a few neighborhoods in Chicago trying to really map and uproot stories that are related to the development of house music. Our last one was at the DeSalle Museum. We're here at the Silver Room today. Our next one is July 27th in Humboldt Park at Reunion, 2557 West North Avenue, if you want to come. And that particular one will be dedicated to Latinos in house, the Latinx queer Latino community, and the West Indian Caribbean Latino influences in house. So we're really encouraging you to stay with us. So today is actually the first of 3 panels that are on the west side. So here we're on sort of the Noble Square, West Town area to look at those influences and those stories in house and some of the venues, DJs, party promoters that were critical to house's development. Here on the west side. I'm sorry. Oh, okay. Sorry. So the next one will be in Humboldt Park, and then the third one in July, in August will be in Lawndale, in the Lawndale area. So we're hoping that you come visit us. So we think it's really important to map, to archive these stories, to tell our story of the development of house music. So a lot of people know the music as EDM, as dance music, but we know that this music is rooted in Chicago. This is why we call it Chicago House. And its story lies all over Chicago. So it starts in the South Side, in Black communities. It migrates into downtown, through the West Side, up through the North Side. And it becomes this huge music scene and culture that people are loyal and committed to, that people have grown up in. We're talking about 3 or so generations of house heads who've grown up in the music, who are committed to it. So we want to tell that story. We want to find those stories. We want to archive them. We want to keep track of them. We want to have a timeline and a history of them because we feel it's important. It's our story of who we are as contemporary Chicagoans, especially Chicagoans of color. So I'm just going to start with the bios of our panelists. Our moderator, Dr. Maida Teresa McNeil, is an independent artist, educator, administrator, and scholar whose work lays at the intersection of performance studies, dance, and critical ethnography. Maida also works with the Chicago Parks District as the Arts and Culture Manager, supporting community arts partnerships, youth arts, cultural stewardship, and civic engagement initiatives across city parks and cultural centers. Panelist Eric Williams, who is the owner and founder of Silver Room, is the founder and creative director of the Silver Room, a community events hub, art gallery, and real estate space established in 1997 in Wicker Park. As a social entrepreneur, Williams addresses the historic disenfranchisement in communities of color by providing space, support, and programming that responds to his core constituents' needs. Panelist Howard Bailey has worn many hats and provided several cultural spaces on Chicago's Black social cultural scene, from being a bouncer at Medusa's nightclub, where many of us know him from, opening up at Literary Explosion, AKA Lit X, where the Starbucks is now located at Damon North and Milwaukee. That's where Lit X was. A premier open mic poetry reading housed in Wicker Park's Another Level bookstore. Opening Beat Parlor, record store in Wicker Park, and the ever so popular Slicks Lounge, a restaurant and nightclub that was a hub for many DJs, recording artists, and promoters on Chicago's soul and hip hop scene. Thank you for being here. So today's panel, this is one of 3 panels that will take place today, is called Creating Black Social Spaces Through Black Entrepreneurship, from LitX to Square One to the Silver Room. So thank you.
All right.
Hello.
Hello. So thank you all for being here. It is a special pleasure to be able to moderate this conversation with you because it takes me back to my youth and thinking about actually like this was the scene. We've kind of tracked several different eras of the house disco black social scene, and this is kind of the scene that this is the era I grew up in. So, from Medusa's to Slicks to Square One to Silver Room Block Party. So we're gonna start with just having you describe your start, both of you, in kind of the nightlife and black social cultural industry, and thinking about the business of organizing cultural spaces. So how did you get started? What's your story?
My start, a lot of it's really some blessed by God, Forrest Gump type shit. Being at different places at different times and the opportunities that presented themselves from that time. I don't think you could ever map out and try to plot out to do any of the stuff that either one of us have done. Yeah, truly right place, right time, the grace of God.
Mine, I would say, started at my father's bar called Manny's Blue Room out in Robbins. So I started throwing parties in '84 because he had Stepper Set and Herb Kent was one of his DJs. So I just kind of saw the importance of magic and music. Then I got into house music in the '80s, started DJing, started playing around a little bit. Once I moved to Wicker Park and found a space, hooked up with Ron Trent, we started throwing parties back in the early '90s, and just always enjoyed bringing people together. But I think it really started with my father, seeing his bar and how people coming together was something important, and how we can use music to bring people together.
So let's talk specifically about like Milwaukee Avenue and the surrounding area of kind of Wicker Park, Ukrainian Village. What do you think? What's the importance of this era if we're talking about kind of chapters of kind of Chicago house history and Black social culture history? What is the importance of these spaces in the '90s, early 2000s for continuing the culture?
I think with the inexpensive rent, the large spaces, it gave a lot of people a place to nurture what they were doing without it being a struggle. They got a chance to do what they love without it being like, oh, we got to pay rent, or we got to do this, or the electric bill is due. Wicker Park was a lot, and the surrounding areas, there was a lot of, pretty much like any other gentrified area, there's a lot of space and an inexpensive entry level. And so I think that's why a lot of them, from the 89 from 89 when Diz and Byron were doing parties at 1455 to 5 years later when people like Lego and then were doing things at 1355. It's like you didn't have to worry about, it wasn't that expensive to play. Versus now, it's like anything you try to do, retail spots, it's like, it's twice the amount of mortgages. So it's like there's very few outlets left, like it was over here in like the 80s and 90s.
For me, coming to Wicker Park in the early '90s, it was a little different because I'm from the south suburb. It was all black, So coming here was like, oh wow, it's different kinds of people, enjoying same music. It was this one bar I used to go to on Augusta. What was it called? On the corner? Lizard Lounge, right. So I remember going, Lizard Lounge was like my first actually bar over here going. It's like, oh, this is a cool spot. And Adam played there with Johnny Fiasco, I think. Yeah, and just kind of seeing like different people coming together, different kind of music, in a different neighborhood that was not downtown. So I was like, oh, this is really interesting. And then later, fast forwarding, when I met Howie through Kendall at Lit X, it was like this center, this hub. Like you said, it was cheap rent, it was big spaces, no police. I used to park my car in the alley every day for like 4 years. Never got a ticket. You know what I mean? So it was a freedom of, from just the infrastructure made sense, the train stop made sense, the cheap rent made sense, the large spaces made sense, the lack of oversight. Nobody really cared too much about the neighborhood, which was good in some ways. So I think that led to the building of the energy and being creative in Wicker Park in the early 90s.
Hello? Okay. What would you say are some of the challenges of doing, creating spaces in this area in that same time period?
My big thing was purchasing the real estate that we were in, because I'd seen too many cases where people did well and got pushed out, and the next person came in and made it look all Starbuckish, and the people that brought the flavor to the community were slowly pushed out. So the biggest challenge was getting people to actually believe in themselves, to actually plant roots in the community that they had created.
I mean, I would echo a lot of that answer. I mean, I was in my early, mid-20s when I first moved over here, so I wasn't really thinking about trying to purchase property at that point, honestly. I was more just trying to like make a living and see how I could use arts and culture and music to make money. Later on, I'm like, oh man, I wish I would have bought that building when I had a chance to. But you're not thinking that when you're 25 years old. So, I mean, the challenge was really just trying to, always trying to have enough money to get stuff going, always trying to figure out how to promote something, I think when we really figured out how to do that, it was almost like it was too late. Like, oh, things have changed already now. That building that might have been $200,000 is now $1 million. So I think that was the scope of what happened with me, at least, throughout my almost 20 years in the neighborhood.
Let's talk a little bit about the stepping stones from you, like conceptually, like from the first spaces that you opened to the next one and the next. Like how did the vision evolve for you? Like from, what's the first spaces you opened, and then moving into whatever you created after? Like how did that vision evolve for you both?
Well, for me, I met Kendall, who owned Lit X, on the street. I was just telling Howie earlier today, it's how we actually met. I used to be a street peddler. At the Blues Fest, I was selling T-shirts. This guy walked up and said, hey, I got a store in Wicker Park. Do you want to put your stuff in my store? I never heard of Lit X before. So, I said, okay, cool. I came over the next day or following day, and he let me put stuff in the store. So that was my introduction to Wicker Park, was through Kendall. And that's how I met Mario and Eileen and Tina. And it was like the space that folks were like, in the back doing poetry and blah, blah, blah. It was kind of cool. For me, I was trying to make some money. But I saw that it was just two things happening, So that really informed me about how, when I opened up Silver Room, it was actually just birthed out of the energy from Lit X. Like, you can have a space that you can sell stuff, but you can also do other stuff too. That came directly from Lit X, a cultural hub, And then when I opened up Square One was born out of the idea of Silver Room, but we added a food component to it. So I wanted to have a space that we can eat healthy food and still be entertained, and have a good time. So that's where those spaces came out. And the block party came out of very similar vibes, like, let's do this outside. Let's have fun and party, et cetera, with our culture. We're gonna celebrate this outside. So that's always been informed. Honestly, I can really say it all came from Lit X.
Honestly, everything I've been able to do has been things I've dreamed about doing, were my passions. From partnering with Kendall at Lit X, I was always a reader, to opening up the record store, Beat Parlor. These are all things I was passionate about, and they were things I dreamed about doing. So once again, blessed by God with opportunities to do these things.
What about Dream Cafe? Because that was a space you had for a while in
Dream
England.
Cafe was kind of out of necessity. There was nothing. I mean, there's still nothing over there in Inglewood outside of the Whole Foods where people can sit down and eat, and not eat something that's strictly fried. Although if you want it, you can eat it, but having the option of not doing so. That was one of the ones that came from necessity, and still in the South Side, especially Inglewood, it's needed.
So that's a good segue to think about, like, what are you spent lots of time up here on the north side doing things, have, bases, history on the south side. What are the differences you see in terms of the cultivation of spaces, access to resources, like?
Well, I mean, now there's obviously a lot more resources on the north side. And I mean, end of the day, it's business. I mean, I think how we now understand it's culture, it's food, but you have to make money to do any of this stuff. So when you look at, a cost-benefit analysis, if you're thinking about it from a financial standpoint, how can you make money? Is there enough foot traffic? How do you support the square footage that this space is? And what are you going to sell that people are going to buy? So now if you look at how these neighborhoods changes, I mean, you see what works in this neighborhood wouldn't have worked 20 years ago because the people weren't here. And what worked 20 years ago wouldn't have worked, it wouldn't work now. And I have, and even me like selling jewelry, I could see how the neighborhood changed by the size of the hoops I was selling, because literally like as the neighborhood became gentrified, the size of the hoops got smaller. Because you had the black girls by this size, the Puerto Rican girls by this size, and white girls by this size. So literally I could see the changes in the community by the size of the hoops I was selling. So you have to think about not just the business, but what's the business selling, and
As I sit here with.
no, it's the truth.
Yes.
You get the black girl, the white girl, the black girl, the Puerto Rican earring, But the space and the people around you dictate the business, not the other way around. And so we sometimes think about, this neighborhood changed and these places changed. The place changed because it can only stay in business if it changes, or it won't be in business. So I don't know, my relationship with neighborhood gentrifying, it's a whole nother discussion, which Alma and I had, and Howie had. And Howie and I probably feel the same way about it. Like, I don't hold too much emotion to it, to be honest with you. Even like being in this neighborhood, I'm like, a neighborhood changed, I'll go somewhere else. I mean, I look at it, is there's so much opportunity to create businesses in so many other neighborhoods besides just this one. And actually, it's a smarter business idea long term to go buy a property in another neighborhood that you can afford it and create something there. So that's kind of how I think about shifting neighborhoods. I mean, I'm happy to have the space. This is a temporary space that we did just to do stuff like this, and it's needed. But I think you need spaces in so many other neighborhoods also.
But what does it mean? You're thinking about like the block party, like what does it mean to cultivate and maintain spaces for, or any of these other spaces, for black people and community to gather socially? What is the significance of that?
I mean, the significance is you need a release, you need to actually to celebrate your accomplishments. I mean, to me, the block party is like a culmination of a celebration for an entire year. That's kind of how I see it. Like, okay, I got my friends who are poets, they're dancers, they're writers, they're into fashion. Let's have this one day to kind of celebrate all of that. And it's a good feeling, you need celebration. You need to actually acknowledge, not your just other folks, but also what you've done. And I feel like that one day of coming together, that's what that represents. But also, even a larger picture for me is, if we can do this one party, what else we can do? The party's great, that's cool, but could we open up a school by coming together? Could we open up a business? Could we have like a tutoring session? Could we open up a restaurant, So for me, it's really symbolic of what a community can do if they work together.
How about you?
He's absolutely right. I think that we as a people kind of think about what we conceive as being the hard part of getting things done versus focusing on getting things done. And we spend years bitching and complaining about something, and people come and go and do it, get it done, try, fail, whatever, and you got the same group of people talking about what we can't do.
What are some of the examples that you see of people getting it done? So like, Black Party could be one example. The Dream Cafe was.
There's a lot in Chicago.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of people doing it in Chicago, and sometimes they get washed away by the people that aren't doing anything. But there's a lot of people. I mean, this room is full of people that are doing things. I mean, it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be on a grand scale or a small scale. It's like you're doing something. And that's the difference, and that's, something that starts off as small. I remember there was probably 100 of us at the first block party. I mean, I remember the first New Year's Eve that Civil Room opened, there was 30 of us, and to see how it's grown over the last 20 years, jeez.
Right.
And had he never started it, he wouldn't be here, period.
Yeah. So I have a couple more questions, and then I'm going to ask if you all have questions of each other, and if not, kick it over to the audience to see if they have any questions or comments they want to make. But I wanted to ask a couple questions that are just related to what this project is that we're doing, is mapping. So I don't know how familiar you are with it, but Chicago Black Social Culture Map began out of this performance project we did way back in 2014 around, we had been mulling for years over and creating HoneyPot around our own experiences with house music, and it being really formative to our friendship, the culture and community we created, and then how we felt like we were living our lives out of those values. And so wanting to kind of pay homage to that and document document that history as cultural heritage. So, it began as kind of just simply taking maps on a wall and having people take Post-its and talk about the places they've been or that they consider part of Black social culture, history, house or not, beyond. But then evolved into this online map. So I just want to ask what you think the significance of doing something like that is for our cult, if we think of house and disco and as these kind of contemporary forms that we engage with here in Chicago and that are part of our cultural history. What are your thoughts on that as the mapping is important to heritage?
It's very important because, as you can see in Chicago, we have a lot of people telling our story that weren't around or didn't play relevant roles or just sometimes nothing more than a fly on the wall, which doesn't discount them being part of it, but then there's people that should be telling a story, people that were there day in, day out, that know the true history versus somebody that was like, oh, I was around or my cousin was around. You got a lot of people that aren't vetted, regurgitating things that they've heard from somebody else year after year, and so then what you get a very watered down version of what was happening or who was involved versus the truth. And I think things like this are necessary. I think I stay in the house more so from people who are so-called legendary and doing things around Chicago when they weren't.
Yeah, to document history is the utmost importance, and I think a lot of times we Black folks, people of color, we haven't done it because we were so busy just doing it, in it, not thinking like, let me take this picture of it, let me understand how this will play in history 5, 10, 100 years later. And other people come and document it in a way that they need to document it to tell a different story. So, even for me, honestly, I don't have tons of photos from back in the day. I was not really thinking about it, so now we have cameras around and everybody has a cell phone and we can kind of document these things, not necessarily for us, but for our children. So history won't be lost and we'll understand where it came from. So it's great that you guys are doing this. And you see other things that, in my opinion, might not be as important that are documented in a much more aggressive fashion. And then the story becomes much more important. And then they can actually build an industry around that, like a house music museum or wherever. There should be one for sure. like a large one, you know. But how do we have the resources to do that and have all of the, you know, all the objects to actually, you know, to store, et cetera, et cetera. So it's super important, very important.
Yeah, cool. All right, I'm going to end with that question. And just, is there anything you would like to ask of each other before I see if folks out here have a question or comment?
So
When you coming to Inglewood?
Coming to Inglewood soon, to a theater near you, man. So I have a question. So you left us and opened up Beat Parlor. I was sad. So our story is, so Kendall, a lot of y'all know, so Kendall who owned Lit X, it was 4 of us he invited. It was you, Eileen, right?
Something like that, yeah.
You, Eileen, me. He brought you and Eileen in to, for merchandise to sell. I was more so keep the lights on. Right. And then Mario was the
Employee,
right,
and him
right.
and Tina curated the poetry that went on for years.
Right. So that was the space, you know. But then he left and opened up Beat Parlor, and I was like, if you know Beat Parlor, it was a great record store. It had a whole barbershop kind of theme. It was dope. What happened? Like, why did that not work? And how long were you there?
5, 6 years. Well, people took a break from buying records, and then I also I opened up Slicks, and that was something that kept me moving 90 hours a week, and so the record store became secondary on top of the fact that the way people were buying records were changing. It was the beginning of the internet and people shopping online, and it was just time to move on, try something new. I did it, loved it, move on.
So that's my second question for you. So do you still have a connection to this neighborhood at all? Emotional connection?
I have a huge one. I mean, my first businesses were over here. My first house was literally around the corner. There are a lot of things progressed over here for not only for me, but for our subcultures, not only house, but hip hop. I saw a lot of things blow up in hip hop. I saw a community where there were a lot of black business owners, and now, you know, you can't really go anywhere else and see that. And I mean, African American business owners, like black, you know, people that were part of this, embedded in this country's soil. We had businesses over here. You don't see that anywhere else. You don't see, you don't see that often. Or not that you don't see that. You don't, outside of barbershops, hair salons, people doing something different, and not the same shit. No, I already asked him when he come to Inglewood.
Actually, I'm working on something where I'll be doing, hopefully the idea is I'll be doing things in a lot of different neighborhoods. But they'll all be on the south side, not around here, so.
Are there questions? You want to get them on?
It's not really a question. I don't need a mic. I know. It's not really a question, just, I mean, you know me, I know you, and we go way back. We can't archive what they've accomplished without giving a big hug and kiss, and we love you, brother, to Roger, who was in that space first, selling magazines. And Roger was one of the first blacks in Wicker Park, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah. You know, he is the Christopher Columbus of Negroes on the north side. He was hemorrhaging, but he had a dream and a goal to have a magazine. I do remember what it was called?
City Lit.
There you go. And he was there first. And he knew, I mean, you don't know much about me yet, but he knew I was broke and needed some work, and I was one of his first employees and was able, and I'm like, look, you're not doing good here, brother. I mean, if you thought Lit X looked rough, City Lit was really rough. Like, they put a lot of work into it. And he brought in Bobby Sox and Greg Place, and they started Triple X upstairs, and that's when Kendall came in. So it was just like this whole, like, I'm the catalyst of all that. chain that went on, and it's like it was just different back then because brothers we didn't know what we were doing, but we did it. You know what I'm saying? Even Roger, and then Roger went on to work with Eric at Silver Room, once again selling his magazines. So definitely we have to give a nod to Roger, who was one of the first brothers over here who had a cultural space even before the neighborhood was ready to sustain a cultural space, you know, and they took it to the next level, and Howard to the next level after that, and Eric took it to the stratosphere, you know. I just wanted to add that I really like, you know I love hearing about both of y'all. To me, these two are legends. You know, I learned a lot from both of them, so.
Anyone else? No? Oh, okay.
Can both of you talk about the time that the inspiration by the products and services by which you said, okay, this is where, I know, Eric, you talked a little bit about learning from your dad, but what made you get into jewelry from learning from your dad? Or, and how you talked about being inspired and being in the right place at the right time. What was that one spark that actually was like, I can do this? This makes sense for me, and how it flowed from there?
I mean, with me, when the opportunity presented itself, it was like grab the bull by his horn. It's like there was nothing to think about. Here's the opportunity to own a bookstore. I was like, that's all I do is read. So I mean, it's like, how am I not going to do this? And same thing when from working at Medusa's, I worked a lot with the Wax Trax gang. And so when they closed down their retail outlet over here, when they moved over here from Lincoln, when they closed down their retail outlet, it was like, do you want to do a record store? It's like, yeah. And Wax Trax, it was like, why? I mean, it's like, it wasn't a spark or anything. It was like, why not? I'd be dumb not to. Or at least that's how I felt.
For me, so I was in college, I went to UIC, and I used to go down to Maxwell Street, and I had a friend who was a street peddler. And so he was like, you should start selling stuff on the streets to make money. At the time I worked at Taco Bell. I was making $3.35 an hour. You remember the $3.35 an hour for y'all? Oh, that was minimum wage. Man, I got a raise, $3.45 an hour. Man, that was like a big deal back then, $3.35 an hour. So a friend was like, man, you can sell stuff on the streets and make more money than $3.35 an hour. And he gave me some stuffed animals. I went to, it was in Douglas Park, a Stop the Violence concert by KRS-One. The first time I ever sold. And we sold some stuffed animals and some like flowers that lit up, like just cheap stuff on the street, but I made like a couple $100. And he paid me a commission out of that. He gave me like $75. I was like, okay, I worked 5 hours and made $75. At Taco Bell, I'm working 5 hours and making $15. Like that was it. So that was it. And I started street peddling. Then throughout college, I met Gas Nation Islam, who was selling T-shirts and just heavy socks, Mystels, and on the train, man, Roosevelt, I mean, Cubs, scalping tickets. It was just like a hustle. And then I met this woman that went to Freaknik and sold T-shirts down there. Then I went to Jazz Fest in New Orleans. I met an African woman who was selling silver. And I was like, and I brought it back to LitX. That's how I started selling silver, was from LitX, actually. Because before that, I was selling bootleg jeans from Canal Street in New York. But the thing was that the silver, I didn't have to have sizes. Because jeans, everybody need to get different sizes. With silver, it's just like a couple different sizes of rings. Women wear earrings all the same size. So I'm like, man, forget these clothes, I'm gonna stick with this thing, because I can only buy, everybody can wear it. And I was selling it on the corner, right in front of Starbucks. I had a little table set up, selling, man, I was making some pretty decent money back then. So that's how I got into silver. Then my father owns Manny's Blue Room, so then I called it Silver Room because of Blue Room, so. That's a little inside story.
Great, more stories. Anyone else? All right. Was there another one over here?
She asked the first question I had, and I remember going to Slicks because that was like the coolest place to go when we were growing up, and wasn't it free to get in? And so when I think about, there were so many places that we could go to. Right downtown, it was like that small coffee shop. They would do open mic, and it was basically free to get in. And there were so many things that were free to get in. So how do you change the culture from always saying, oh, it's not free, I'm not going, to saying, okay, we need to start paying so that these places can stay open longer? Because Slicks would be so packed, I'm pretty sure it was a fire violation how many people were. It was like, it was heaving, and it was so much fun. And I remember one time we drove over and it was closed, and we were like, it was just devastating. I was like, that's because it was free. No, probably nobody was buying drinks, so it was just like, how do you change people from always thinking about getting it in free to start paying something to actually keep it alive?
That's the million-dollar question. But for the record, I was a new father at the time, and I would like getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning instead of walking in the house at 5 o'clock in the morning and enjoying my boys. But people expecting things for free is something that's very poisonous to our cultures, because cultures can't grow if everybody's picking off of it. And if you keep picking at a flower, pretty soon there's nothing left. There's nothing left. And the same thing with our culture. It's like if you keep expecting things for free, you're going to get the equivalent of what free is. And then you're going to bitch and complain about it.
How do you deal with that element of people saying, can I get something for nothing? How do you deal with that, even in your business too?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I've had a physical space where you sell a tangible item and you have a service. It's different because people would never really ask for a pair of sunglasses for free, right? But if I have hosted an event and sunglasses are $15, I could put together an event that costs $1,000 and people want to get in for free. So I think it's this mental thing of like an actual barrier. Oh, they're not thinking about how much this costs. I think about how much these cameras cost, how much, this is kind of how I think about it. But the average person doesn't think about how much things cost to put together and the value that it has. So I think you would just have to kind of take a stand, and I think right now, if I were to do a space, I would do a small space and just say, this is what it is, this is the value, and if you don't want to come, then don't come. Because eventually people will come. People always say, I ain't gonna pay. Even I remember with the Chosen Few picnic, we had a discussion a few weeks ago, and the people who complain the most are the ones who actually pay. So you have to just kind of stand your ground and start to cultivate a community of people who are used to paying, because other people pay no problem. The tickets go on sale for Lollapalooza, $100, $200, $300. They somehow find a way to pay for it. But we sometimes say, and I think it's an excuse, oh, we ain't got no money. That's an excuse. People have money, they just want to pay for certain things. So I think it's just a conditioning that has to happen.
Just to piggyback on what you're saying, like I threw a party that cost money, and I made some money. The club really made some money, and it's really about getting people you don't know involved. People you know, they're not gonna want to pay. They want to get in free. You know that. You have to get people outside of your circle involved to make money. And as long as you reach outside of your circle, they're not gonna come ask for free. They're gonna, if you have a good product or service for them, they're going to pay for it. But your friends, it's the same thing when you make something right now that you want to sell. Like if I made a t-shirt and tried to sell it on the internet, are my friends really gonna buy it? I need to reach people who don't know me to buy it and have them say, man, that's a dope shirt, I'm going to buy it. We have to reach outside of our little circles to make that money. You know what I mean? And I think Eric does a really good job. Howie, of course, even at Slicks, we didn't know everyone at Slicks. But once we got to know them, then they was like, let me get a drink. You know what I'm saying? And then that's the catch-22. Once that good customer starts coming a lot, he also expects. So now you got to have a customer to replace it. I did Red Dog on Saturdays. And what happened with us, once we burned through the West Side people, the Evanston people started coming. Now they were brand new and they were willing to pay. Now, but the West Side people, now they're like, yo, man, I've been here 10 times. What you got for me? So you got to have you got to keep bringing in new clientele. You just can't rest on the laurels of what you started. That's what I believe. I thought it was a good question too, by the way.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hello. My name is Skylar Hearn. I am an archivist, or archivist as we like to say, and special collections librarian. And this is such an honor and a privilege. I'm one of the collaborators with HoneyPotPerformance for this ongoing project. And just sitting next to Duro and him giving accolades to Eric and I'm also going to include Duro in that, and Dwayne, and other folks in the room who I know very well, and yeah, you DJs. I mean, it's really that case where it's like you all really save our lives, and as well as just coupling all of this rich art and culture, and sharing our experiences. These are the things that spoke to me the most, and I was probably like the quietest person at LitX, because I would take the train from the South Side up here, buy a book, some BDs, and I probably bought Your Silver back then too, and I would just be off in the corner, and they like, hey sis, have a plate of food, and I'm like, I'll eat these peas and rice and like chill out and listen to poetry with everybody else. And so, one way or another, we're all sharing in this very like rich, powerful, and very important history that we have. And like, in part, I'm just gonna throw this out there, Eric, I'm gonna give you this charge, and we're gonna somehow start this house museum. Seriously, I really want us to be able to do that, because I think that everybody in this room will be able to add to that, and we will have like this very strong and important space. And I'm very serious about that, especially as an archivist and someone who takes it very seriously to document, preserve, and also provide access to those materials about, our existence, about our contributions as Black and brown people. So, that's my little intro. And the other part is that, as a part of this collaboration, we are collecting oral histories, collecting your stories. If you all, as panelists as well as attendees are interested, and if you can do that today, then, we'll sit down and talk with you for a few moments. If you can't, and if it's cool, either myself or Lauren will follow up with you for that. And then also think about those things that you have. Mostly all of us have, if nothing else, photographs. So think about, sharing those photographs. And even if you have a few, Eric was saying he only has a couple, like over the years of things that he's been a part of. But I mean, like your Eric Silver Room. You put that call out, so many people are gonna say, oh, I have these photos from, when I used to do X, Y, and Z, or like Howie at Slicks, and then even before that, and Duro at Red Dog, different things like that. People are going to say, I have those photos. I was at that party when Siobhan was spinning. I got this photo, and like Dwayne has been doing this, and he was at Dr. Wax. And I have this plugger that I picked up, or either I had this playlist that Dwayne told me I should put together and listen to feel, this way. So, think about that. And, if you decide to do that today, then, talk to me or Lauren. Lauren will be back. And then if you don't, and if it's cool, like I said, we'll follow up and be in contact with you. I'm very serious about what I do. I'm genuine, and we can sit down and have these conversations and think about how we as a collective can, really move that forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Skylar. And I got to shout out Skylar as well for wearing the T-shirt that we keep forgetting to wear when we have these events. Thank you. And we'll wear it next time. But we're going to close here. But before we do, I also want to, the Chicago Black Social Culture Map is HoneyPotPerformance. That's myself, Abra Johnson, who is doing her own recording back there, Jody Presser, and then in addition, Dwayne Powell, who is the lead curator actually for today's event, Larissa Johnson over here, Malade Goggins, who is not here today, and who else, am I forgetting someone on our team? Lauren Lowry, right, who is she'll be back, but she is one of the co-founders of the Dance Music Foundation. So all together, and alongside Skyla with Actively Archiving and her team, we are doing these series of events for 2019, and we'll see where it goes and grows to document our Black cultural history. So thank you, Eric and Howie, for doing this. And if you haven't done an interview, are you going to? Yes. Okay, cool. You did well. We got you, yes. All right, thank you.